All right. Well, hello, everybody. It is the 22nd of May, 1 p.m. Eastern. All right. I'm Joe, also known as the Stoic Viking. And today we're going to be covering what's going on, latest and greatest around the world as much as we can and try to figure it out and make sense of some of the crazy stuff that's going on. So, a lot of things that we're going to be covering today is about Iran, Russia, Ukraine, uh, AI, global economics, drone warfare, and the Starship and SpaceX, which I'm always fascinated with space, always have been. And when SpaceX started doing a thing, I'm going to be honest, I was very excited, and I'm still a fanboy to this day. So, so the main subjects we're going to be uh, attacking here. If anybody comes in, just let me know if you can still hear me. Because everything should still be good. All right, sweet. All right, so we're going to be covering about Iran continuing to destabilize the Middle East. NATO and Russia are preparing for long-term confrontation. Massive casualty numbers in the Ukraine war, with both on Russia and Ukraine, but specifically the staggering numbers that Russia has reached. How through that warfare, drone warfare has drone warfare is a big reason why Russia's suffered so many casualties, and now how not only how that is shaping warfare in Ukraine, but how it is shaping warfare probably for the future. And we're probably not going back. Drones are going to be a huge portion. We kind of knew this was going to happen, but it just really more confirms this. And then, as always, China's constantly trying to position itself as the long-term economic power in the world. That's how they want to become the next superpower. How all the global markets are reacting to the geopolitical instability, and how SpaceX is building. Well, basically, we've got the Starship version 3 launch that's supposed to happen today, later at 6:30. All right, sweet. Appreciate you guys. Corey Ferguson, Obo Voice. All right, I got you. All right, so first of all, we're going to step in and we're going to cover Iran and the Middle East. So, if anybody's been a part of my lives the last couple times, usually I've been using streaming software to in order to show videos and show clips. But we've been having some issues with the reach. So today we are doing a bit of an experiment. We are going to cast directly through YouTube Live and see how it goes. And unfortunately for you guys are gonna have to look at my ugly face for the entire stream, and there won't be any videos or any graphics that we're putting up on this one. But until we can fix everything, this is how we're gonna do things. So, all right. So it's obviously everybody knows that we are still in a conflict with Iran, and the IRGC is still trying to put their pressure on the Strait of Hormuz with what little resources they have left, which is just essentially fast boats. And the mere threat of these fast boats with what limited weapons does cause issues. Some people are asking the questions like, why, if their Navy forces have been degraded so much, then why are they still having an effect on the strait? And that's a great question. And the thing is that what little military sources still have a threat to these ships, and they still have to take that into account because they don't want to have any sort of damage done to these oil tankers, because as big as they are, they're not only can they actually be damaged pretty easily, but they actually don't have the largest of crews and can be taken over by force pretty easily, actually. All right. Smiley man, good to see you, brother. Did you catch up reporting about possible 9-point peace plan publishing later today? The Qatars are supposed to facilitate it. Yes. So there are as you know, there are multiple iterations of the supposed deal. So the problem is, and you're going to have to, if you haven't really already noticed, that the main issue why a deal is not being signed, right, and why it's probably never going to be signed on the side of Iran is because if Iran signs any sort of deal, that tells not only to the world, but more importantly, to their own people that they have surrendered. And that is why the rhetoric that's coming out of Iran and the IRGC is so ridiculous. Like they are asking for things that they didn't even have prior to this war, like something that, like that they want control of the Strait of Hormuz. That would only happen is if you were the victor of this conflict. And the reason why they're doing this, and it may sound ridiculous and they make these guys sound like idiots, but they're doing it because they're trying to present to their own people that they are the victors in this conflict in order a desperate attempt to try to keep a stranglehold of the population of their country. So because of that, because they don't really have any other sort of choice, they are going to continue this ridiculous rhetoric, and these talks are probably going to continuously fail until somebody within that government can eventually be like, hey, we've lost, we'll accept that, based on the ideology of the RGC. And a lot of these guys, not only is that their livelihood is threatened by by the fall of the Islamic Republic, a lot of these guys, their lives are on the line as well, because you can imagine how many of these IRGC officials, officers, are going to be held accountable when a new government comes into power. Corey Ferguson, thanks, brother. I appreciate it. Um, so, Iran is trying to basically wait this thing out, but as we know that we have cut off their majority of their income, their economic uh, sort of. I'm sorry, let me bring that back. We've cut off or how they get majority of their money, and we know this because Karg Island, which does about 90% of the crude oil, all their where they hold the oil until it can be transported is completely full. It's been full, I think, for over a week, and there's very little money coming into the country, and that is cutting them off economically. They are sort of swirling the drain, if you will. And as time is not their friend, so you can see the strategy doesn't not really end well for them, and they're essentially hoping for a bit of a miracle. Whether they can possibly not shoot down an American pilot, capture him. Basically, those are the type of things that could put America into pause or get America to do something. What they'd actually want us to do is to actually invade, because if they were to do that, they could the majority of the military that is left is the ground forces, and Iran is not exactly the easiest terrain. So not only would that give them more of a fighting chance to fight us, but it also and they know that would cause us a lot of political issues for the United States and specifically this administration and prior to midterms. And that's honestly the thing that they're hoping for probably the most. All right. So one of the biggest concerns, obviously, the Strait of Hormuz. So for anybody who doesn't know, that roughly 20% of the world oil supply passes that region, which at any time tensions there, this will affect the oil prices throughout the world. And it may not actually, just the mere threat of the strait or conflicts going on can change the oil price, even if there is actually no restriction in the flow of oil. And so, because you have to understand that's how a lot of markets works. It's not necessarily how much they are actually affected, it's how the perception of how they are affected. Because that's how a lot of these markets, it's the perception is actually what drives prices in the stock markets. Smiley Man, do you feel a forcible removal of the nukes would be worth the loss of US lives during a possible operation? You know, if we have to think about it in the grand scheme of things, if they have enough uranium and I think I saw a figure on this, what the high level of enriched uranium. I saw a figure about this the other day. I believe it said they could create over 100 nuclear weapons with the amount of uranium that they have, right? I don't know if it's what enrichment level it is, but with that level of uranium and they were to enrich it to a certain point, it's my understanding they could make over 100 weapons, right? So, question is, how many lives would it be to risk to take something like that out of their hands versus if you didn't, what are the potential lives lost if they were able to make nuclear weapons, right? And there's no easy answer to this question, right? Anybody who says there is, you're not really thinking, right? Because there's pros and cons and everything, right? Could they just, even with that uranium, never even make a nuclear weapon? It's possible, right? But do you take that chance, especially with weapons of mass destruction, right? And I know that's sort of a catch 22 or even saying that because of how do we get into the Iraq war? Because of the threat of weapons of mass destruction. So, um, so I think this is not an easy subject to go into, but I personally think that unlike Saddam, I actually do think that Iran is trying to get nuclear weapons. It's for a lot of different reasons. I was professionally, I dealt with operations and plans against the IRGC and the Islamic Republic, and it is our over decades of this. And then I can tell you that we definitely believe um, that they would use a nuclear weapon if they could actually get one, especially in this situation. So, with that being said, I would say that it would definitely be worth lives. And I would even go as far as if I was still in, and I know this, someone may raise eyebrows about this, but if I was still in, I would volunteer for a mission like that. And that's just me personally. And that's everybody for just to decide on themselves. Very interesting point. This invasion, do you think we would ever go all out war or give the China possession nuclear weapons? That's a very good question. All right, so Smiley Man, very interesting point to pivot to China. If there was an invasion of Taiwan, do you think we would ever go to all-out war, then give China possesses nuclear warheads? Are you asking if we were to invade Taiwan? I'm trying to understand your question. Do you think we'd ever go all war? Oh, okay, now I understand it. So would we ever go all out war with China to possess warheads? Okay, so whenever you're going out dealing with war, right? And this is actually kind of related to one of the reasons why people are like, well, other countries have warheads and nuclear weapons. Why is it okay for like China and the United States and UK and France to have nuclear weapons and it's not okay for Iran? Well, if you look at the people within that country and the people within the culture, and even like Russia, right? We proved it during the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, having a sort of culture and a value system, nuclear weapons are a deterrent. But if you are a country that has them, that does not care if it survives and would actually give its life to kill another group of people, those are to the type of people when nuclear deterrence does not work. Okay, so that's one of the issues why Iran, or the Islamic Republic having a nuclear weapon is a particular bad thing because there would be no deterrence because um, they believe that it is their path to heaven is using nuclear weapons on Israel and on the United States. So it's definitely something I personally don't think that we should go down that road. But when dealing with Taiwan, would going to all war with China, um, would that be an issue, right? And actually, let me back up real quick. So one of the issues that we have with Russia is that Russia, throughout the Cold War, nuclear deterrence was used, and we were able to essentially avoid using nuclear weapons because Russia didn't want to die just to kill us, right? This mutual destruction thing is a very powerful thing. But if they are already going to lose, what then would Russia do? So when we originally, before the Ukraine war, we actually thought Russia's military was stronger than it actually turned out to be. And we learned this based on the Ukraine war because we thought Russia was just going to steamroll Ukraine. But and this creates a problem because Russia's weaker than we thought they were. And then if we were then to essentially go all out war with Russia, with Putin and the people who are in charge of Russia, if they think that their country, they're already on the brink of extinction, then would they use nuclear weapons? And so that is even another question. So, and now going back to China, if we were to go in an all out war with China, which was okay, if the conflict was just about, hey, we're just going to fight over Taiwan, I don't think nuclear weapons would be used. But if we then started to invade China and we were there on the brink of winning a war, which is taking out China into um, its nation's sovereignty, then that is definitely the highest risk of then using nuclear weapons. But at the same time, they have to understand if they use nuclear weapons, we're using them back. All right. Personally, I imagine other proxy wars similar to our support of Ukraine currently. Yeah. So you also have to remember that China does not want to fight us, right? They have a military and they're using it as a bargaining chip, but China does not want to fight us. That just it's not how they do things. That's not it would probably would not go well for them. Obviously, probably wouldn't go that great for us either, but I guarantee you that China would probably lose more than they hope to gain. And that's what how China does things. They plan in dynasties. And their plan is to become the economic superpower to replace us as the most influential power in the world. And they know that's going to take time. So they're playing the long game. So while Taiwan is a threat, I don't believe that Taiwan would, or China is very unlikely that China would actually go through with a military action on Taiwan just because of the possible conventional blowback that would come from them invading the country and us taking military action against them. So that is something. So just because in our there's a lot of posturing. China's going to say they're going to do something. The United States is say they're going to do something, but in a lot of cases, whether or not that actually gets followed through, that's a whole different story. And that's the other thing is like there's a lot of posturing, political posturing. There's a lot of rhetoric being used, and a lot of that is, hey, I'm going to say this crazy stuff to accomplish something, so I don't actually physically have to do it. So that's something you always need to keep in mind. My understanding is they lack combat experience. I hope Chinese military vehicles are built as poorly as their tofu construction high rises bridges. Yeah. So, two countries that are really well known for reverse engineering, which is China and Iran. So you'll notice a lot of their like fifth generation fighters, a lot of their ships, a lot of cool new technology that they're coming out with kind of resemble ours. And that's not an accident. So, but because they reverse engineer it, now the original ones, generally they're not as good, which is fine. But also one advantage is to us doing all these conflicts and doing all these, the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, the Iran conflict. Our troops, not only do they already have because we have so much funding in our military, way more than China does, because training is done because of funding, right? So our troops already have more training, But because of all these conflicts, obviously it's not great to be in these conflicts for multiple different reasons, but one of the positive side effects is that our pilots, especially our air forces and and naval aviators, and Marines as well, and probably some Army guys mixed in there, we have some of the probably the most amount of combat experience, which makes it takes our training to another level. So that has to be taken into a factor. Is the human factor is not only who's the most trained, not only it's not just who has the best weapons, who is the most trained, and who has the most combat experience, because that's huge in real life combat. Jean Pierre, what's up, brother? Hey, when did you start streaming midday? Second, importantly, reports are breaking that Tulsi is resigning. Family matter, and how significant is this? All right, awesome. So, John Pierre, so I just hired a media company. All right, so now I can start doing stuff during the week, and I because now I can record, and I just send them the videos, and they just record it now. So we have a new schedule now. So especially as of starting next week, every Monday and Friday, I'm using sorry, every Monday and Friday. Hey, can you tell I grew up in Germany? Every Monday and Friday, we're doing a live at 1 p.m. And then every Wednesdays, we're gonna bring it back workout Wednesdays. We're gonna go live in the gym, probably around 12 to 1 p.m. So basically there's gonna be 3 lives during the week. Um, and then we're gonna get out more content throughout the week. So I'm looking forward to see what we can do, how we develop this. Next step is I'm going to get new cameras. I'm actually going to design a bit of a studio. I'm pretty sure everybody's a little sick and tired of this bland ass room with lighting that I can't control. So that's a skylight up there that I can't cover. It's too tall. So, anyways, so another thing that we talk about Iran is some of the internal instability that's going on inside Iran. So one of the major questions that people are asking is, are we seeing a rising resistance against the IRGC within Iran itself? And we actually are. And if you guys have not heard, there's actually a group within Iran that are actually calling themselves the Immortals, right? The Immortals, kind of based off of the elite Persian unit for the Persian Empire in 300. These guys are calling themselves the Immortals. So I'm all about cool names, if you guys couldn't tell already. But there is definitely signs we are seeing a rise in the attacks against IRGC police, IRGC officials, IRGC facilities, and there's actually been bombing of government facilities. There was recently, and Iran is at the same time trying to play the political propaganda campaign that these strikes that just all happen to be against Iranian government facilities. They are saying that they are unexploded U.S. munitions, that they bombs they got dropped and they just randomly just started going off, whatever. Not that they the Iranian people are doing domestic attacks against their government. You know, you can look at it however you want, and you can analyze it knowing the history of Iran, the propaganda, everything that's going on, because the economic pressures that are going on in the country are affecting the people of Iran more than they are the government. Because what little money that is coming in, I guarantee the government, the IRGC, and the Islamic Republic are hoarding what little money, and so the people of Iran are hurting, and they understand why that is because of the IRGC. Like they're the reports that we are getting out due to the internet restrictions, the people of Iran, the majority of them, do understand it's because of the IRGC and the Islamic Republic, and are not really blaming us, which is a good thing for us. But unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of suffering going on in that country. All right. So so over the last week, there have been continued reports of sabotage, arrests tied to alleged infiltration networks, covert operations, attacks on regime-linked infrastructure, and increased regime concern about more internal threats, which we sort of already talked about. So there's been Molotov attacks that have been thrown at different facilities and patrols. There have been assassinations of IRGC checkpoints. There's been tons of anti-regime graffiti. There's been attacks on besieged linked locations. and there is a growing underground resistance activity. And there's definitely been a lot of attacks throughout the country, but definitely in the southeast and the Baluchistan region. And so, but it's also important here to because the information inside Iran is a very extremely difficult to verify in real time. So as things are coming out, right? Not as information comes out because it's so restricted, when information does come out, we still have to verify it. And because of the internet restrictions, it's very hard to verify what little information comes out. So as much as we want to with our confirmation bias, and and everybody pretty much knows where I stand on this whole Iran conflict, even I have to step back and be like, okay, this sounds great, but is it verified? And that's another story. So there's been a lot of it coming out. I think in generally it's true, but these specific instances, it's hard to verify them in real time. We just kind of say like, hey, this is it looks like what's going on, and probably will verify these specific um incidents like later on. Because I just saw a reporting about they just killed a IRGC third lieutenant. So yeah, so when we're going at this information that's coming out, that's being smuggled out, internet restrictions, the censorship that's coming out, or because of that internet restrictions, then the propaganda that's coming out, because the one thing that is allowed to come out is the propaganda from the state media. So, and then not only are they trying to control the perception of the outside world, they're actually trying to control the perception of the people within Iran. Like they're trying to get the people of Iran to think that they're winning this war, which obviously they are not. Um, so a couple things. So some of the biggest indicators that something that is happening internally is actually the regime's behavior. So we talked about this for a couple weeks. Is that Iran is so afraid of its own people that they brought in Shia militias that they created for the Syrian conflict in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They have brought them into Tehran to help enforce their curfew, or they are basically their what's the term I'm looking for? It's um, martial law, basically within Tehran and apparently a couple other cities. So um, so the Iranian government has intensified surveillance of its own people. They've expanded arrests. The last figure I saw that have arrested 6,500 people within the last few months, just for suspicions of either working against the Iranian government and aiding the United States. They've increased executions. They've conducted constantly. There's been internet blackouts since February 28th, and have really repeatedly warned about infiltration of traitors. Because, as you guys can probably guess, there are probably CIA agency members, not just from the United States, but probably Israel, and probably tier one operators, the different small advisors and guys running sources within the country. And they are definitely, the Iranian government is definitely trying to find the people that are doing that. So that's definitely going on. All right. All right. So one of the biggest misconceptions people have Iran is assuming that the regime and Iran people are the same thing. This appears to be growing anger directed specifically at the IRGC and the regime apparatus itself after years of economic collapse, repression, and corruption. So, all right, so we're going to transition to the NATO versus the Russia-Ukraine war. So at the same time, NATO and Russia continue moving toward a long-term confrontation model, and the Ukraine war has now become one of the most attritional conflicts that the world has seen since World War II. So, so this war started in 2022, right? So we're coming up on the. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it 2022 is when it started? But we're coming up on. So what's interesting is what it came into my attention recently was what Russian casualties have reached at this point, and they have crossed the 1 million mark. All right, so remember that's casualties. So casualties include killed, wounded, and missing people, and incapacitated troops, but that usually kind of goes under wounded, but there could be some level of distinction. So now the current estimates are 1 to 1.3 million, which is staggering. And most estimates, as far as like specifically deaths, and this is honestly, it's hard to verify because remember, there's going to be propaganda on both sides, or Ukraine and other Western medias want to say that the number is higher than it actually is. And Russia's going to want to say that the number is lower than it actually is. So the estimates of roughly how many Russian soldiers have died within this conflict is, or Russian deaths, maybe not necessarily soldiers, is between 230,000 and 500,000 killed. So with most things, it's probably somewhere in the middle. So if I had to guess, it's probably, and usually towards the lower portion, but it's probably somewhere around 350,000. If I had to guess, just based off experience of how medias and these casualty assessments or predictions go. So, and then of course, obviously, so why are the Russians' losses so high? So there's been this war has sort of slowed into attrition, almost kind of like we're back into trench warfare, which we really haven't seen since World War One, which had extremely high casualty rate, repeated frontal assaults, and what the difference between this trench warfare has is that eventually trench warfare was actually broken up, if anybody's was actually by the invention of tanks, because tanks were the things that could go over no man's land. They could go over trench warfare, which is why they were actually designed in the way that they are, right? But tanks are no longer very effective because of the dawn of drone warfare, because you get these extremely expensive tanks, and it's crewed by, typically most Russian tanks are three-man crews, and it can all be taken out by a cheap drone. And so drone warfare has completely revolutionized this particular conflict, and it will probably revolutionize most ground conflicts going forward. And I think drone technology, um, right now is not fast enough to really affect like the what's going on in the Iranian conflict, is just because they're not technologically equipped, they're not fast enough to catch up with essentially modern military aircraft. But in ground warfare, you can definitely use your standard drones that you buy for like 50, 100 bucks, strap some explosives to it, and then you can land it on the weakest parts of the armor, which is usually on the top or somewhere on the back, and you're able to. And this is really what comes down to economy of warfare. If you can eventually kill your enemy or kill their equipment with really cheap equipment, and they have to spend a lot of money to replace theirs, you will eventually win that conflict, or most likely. So, and obviously, the area of Ukraine and Russia, especially during the winter, not the nicest place as far as climate and weather in the cold. And so there's a poor level of infantry survivability and just constant prolonged offensive operations. But something that's actually interesting this week is that, or I think it's the last like week or last 2 weeks, is that Ukraine has actually gained more ground than Russia has, net ground, like net gains. And then I believe in the first time in the war, Ukraine has actually launched more strikes than Russia has. And it's the first time this full war. So that could be signs that maybe the war is turning in Ukraine's um, the war could be turning in Ukraine's favor. But just because there's a push on Ukraine's side, that doesn't really mean much. That could be just like, if you look at the history of war, a lot of times a losing side will do a last ditch effort, and they will do a counteroffensive push. Right. This is what the Germans did. Uh, towards the end of World War II, which would then, I believe, was the Ardennes offensive. I could be wrong, which then led to the battles of the Bulge, and that was like one of their last ditch efforts in order to stop the Allies' push across Europe. All right, so the Ukrainian casualties. They've roughly current estimates of how many casualties Ukraine has lost, and remember, this is killed, wounded, incapacitated, or missing. And this is not just then this list doesn't necessarily fully capture civilian deaths, um, but the number of deaths on the Ukrainian side is roughly between 500 to 600,000. So it's about half. So the Russians have lost 2 to 1. And while this may think, okay, that's good, right? Well, I can tell you that Russia not only has way more money, more than twice as much money as Ukraine, Russia also has more than twice as much people or Russia has twice as many people as Ukraine. So while this is good for the Ukrainian people, that does not necessarily mean that Ukraine is still going to win this conflict. So, but yeah, because even if Russia's losses are significantly higher numerically, Ukraine is under a tremendous long-term strain because Ukraine has a smaller population, it has fewer manpower reserves, and has a much smaller economy. But this war has been exhausting on both sides. So, all right. So a couple reasons why the Russia momentum has slowed, because they were gaining ground pretty consistently for a while. As the massive Russian casualties, the drone warfare, the logistical strain because of this conflict and how far, because Russia's a big country and a lot of their munitions and supplies are made in some pretty far corners of Russia. Ukrainian, they have a lot of deep strike capabilities, which they've been using and have been pretty effective, especially on Russian supply lines, and which has led to the attacks on some of the Russian infrastructure. And there's just an increasing operational fatigue. So Ukraine has increasingly targeted rail systems, logistic hubs, fuel depots, and communications, and essentially their oil infrastructure inside Russia. But Russia still controls roughly 20% of the Ukrainian territory, including Crimea and much of the occupied east. Russia, excuse me, still maintains much larger man pool. Much more. Russia still maintains much larger manpower and reserves. They have a much larger, expanded wartime industrial production, so they can definitely put out war weapons. If Ukraine had not basically kind of figured out drone warfare to the level that it has and sort of pushed so hardly into this, Ukraine probably would have lost this conflict already, because they are definitely probably winning as far as the economy of war is going, just because they're spending so little to destroy equipment from Russia that's so expensive. So they're definitely able to level the playing field. And they do have substantial um, and Russia's also using their own drone strikes as well. So, so the current phase is probably best described as one, slowing Russian momentum, increasing Ukrainian tactical effectiveness, and continued attritional warfare without any sort of decisive breakthroughs on either side. So, but one of the biggest changes that's happening right now isn't, as we talked about, isn't really the fact that there aren't any breakthroughs in the Ukrainian conflict, but it's just how much drone warfare has changed this particular conflict, and it will have an effect on all of their ground conflicts throughout the world, because the rest of the world is seeing that Ukraine, which has a much smaller conventional military, is keeping Russia at bay because of drones. And that is honestly the main reason that they are still in this fight. So before we actually go to this, let's answer another question. So, Silver Soldier, how do you feel about Cuba? I kind of believe we will eventually own the entire West. Well, um, that is definitely a possibility. So, you've seen a big shift in the uh, the overall sort of political views that are going on, not just in North America, but in South America. We've seen this in Argentina with their president, El Salvador, um, and a number of other countries, obviously, what we did in Venezuela. And there, there is a large political movement throughout all of North and South America towards this um, no longer sort of supporting outside actors like China. So us, and that had a number of different effects. So us taking out Maduro in Venezuela, China's a lot of their influence was coming in through Venezuela, and because they were getting a number of their oil, and they were actually helping. Venezuela had essentially was their kind of beacon or their beachhead for influence within South America. And since they've lost that, and they've obviously lost money, they've lost capability, but they've lost influence within the area. And then one of the last bastions is Cuba. And Cuba is struggling economically. They always have, right? And then eventually, at what point, like you can even draw this parallel to what's going on in Iran, is the current government, how long can they hold on? And with us, with Russia tied up in Ukraine, China, who really no longer has their level of influence in South America and obviously also by proxy Central America, how much longer can the current government hold out with everything that's going on in Cuba without their help from either Russia or China? And we definitely could see finally the dictators and the government and the remnants of the Castro government within Cuba that will eventually fall, and then essentially a friend of the United States, new government comes in, gets elected. That could definitely happen within the near future, just because of the few things that were helping Cuba to stay afloat are dwindling, if you will. So, all right. All right. So going back to drone warfare. So I hope that answered your question of Silver Soldier, right? Yeah, Silver Soldier 14. All right. So drones are now being used by nation states, insurgent groups, terror organization, proxy forces, and even criminal cartels. We're seeing this down in Mexico, Colombia, and this has changed the balance of power dramatically. A relatively cheap drone can now threaten armored vehicles, air defense systems, infrastructure, shipping, and even supply lines. And basically strategic military assets, all because of drones, and they're super cheap and you super easy, user friendly. Because you got to think about how long does it take a pilot to train a pilot to operate these aircraft? Because of drones and AI technology, all you need is a controller, and majority of like the technique and training that you need to understand the physics of flight, the computer systems on board the drones take care of all that. So training to learn how to fly drones is much shorter, much easier than the amount of training that goes into training these pilots. So this also goes on not only into the economies of war and how much money it costs, but the timing, how much longer it takes. Because if you kill, let's just say some Air Force pilots, how many years does it take to retrain those pilots to train new ones, right? Versus how much longer does it take to train somebody to operate a drone? So the cartels of Mexico are using drones. They're using for surveillance, intimidation, explosive tactics, and tactical operations. And this is one of the reasons that the Mexican government rapidly investing in counter drone systems with laser systems, jamming technology, AI tracking, and electronic warfare. So the future battlefield may belong less to whoever's the biggest military in the future and whoever can adapt the fastest. And right now, definitely drones is making a big impact. But it's you are now getting people who can cause major military equipment and strategic assets damage through a very cheap process. And drones give them the ability to have a reach that we probably didn't encounter before. So this is definitely going to be something that we're going to have to. It's going to complicate warfare even against the smallest actors. Even if it's like rebels in jungles in Africa or something like that, that they could be able to get drone warfare and cause more damage than we originally were used to them being able to do. It's going to increase everybody's capability across the world. No, you're not wrong. Silver Soldier says we are drafting gamers and women for the next one. So, uh, yeah, you got to think about it. Why would you not? Right? They're probably going to be the best ones. And to be honest, I would not be surprised if a lot of the military, if the U.S. obviously is going to need to expand our drone programs, I would be not surprised if they start doing targeting as far as recruiting, specifically through like video games. Like maybe you'll start seeing ads for the military on Steam or something like that. All right. So, like a lot of things, eventually our biggest um, opponent right now in the world, because we always used to be kind of afraid of what Russia might do, right? And Russia's kind of predictable. Two, we actually thought Russia was more effective militarily, but then we saw that with Ukraine, the fact that they can't even beat Ukraine, that they are much weaker than we thought they were. Between their training, their weapon systems, we gave it too much credit. And also Russia's sort of like positioning and the level of the reach that they have, with their navy and stuff, they're just not as big of a threat as they thought they were. Right? China is a different story because China is not as predictable. They don't follow the typical models of an adversary that we've dealt with, like with the Soviet Union, Cold War, and other big state actors. They want to win these wars through positioning themselves as the political superpower throughout the world. So China is increasingly focusing on economic leverage, manufacturing dominance throughout the world in AI. They're also concentrating on more controlling as much infrastructure as they can throughout the world, including even in the United States. Like you probably heard about Chinese companies buying a lot of land outside of U.S. military installations. Um, so, and they are always going to favor long-term positioning rather than direct military engagement, for a number of different reasons, right? While they have a decent military, they're not as effective as ours, and they they would probably lose more ground than they would hope to gain. So China wants to play us in the long game, sort of um, get us locked into a number of different conflicts, try to damage our economy, and essentially overpower us as far as influence and economic power. And because they know that understand that prolonged wars will drain the U.S. economy, have the potential to weaken us, not just economically, but also our resolve and create divisiveness within the United States. So even if we did want to respond, that there's so much divisiveness in the United States that we would actually be delayed in our reaction to anything that that they did. And so these are all things that they want to sort of perpetuate within the United States, not just the United States, but any of our other allies. But their strategy is being patient, economic, concentration on technology, and overall just a long-term approach to this overall goal of theirs. Because China is increasingly looks like it's trying to win its influence through economics, infrastructure, technology, and patience. So, with everything that's going on, so how does that affect global economic pressure? Hey, Goose Gap, what's up, man? What's up, brother? Really appreciate you and what you're doing and do. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate that. All right. So global economic pressure, because there's a lot of things that are going on with the global economy, with all these geopolitical events that will, it starts affecting ordinary people, and that's when we notice. Like, obviously, we look at the gas prices, see how much they've raised. When for everybody who doesn't live in California, gas prices going over $4, we obviously notice, and a lot of things are affected by all of this. So, but most people think geopolitics is separated from their daily lives, but it's not, right? So, what happens in the Strait of Hormuz, Taiwan, Ukraine, the Red Sea, and even China's manufacturing sector? These all will eventually affect gas prices, groceries, inflation, interest rates, jobs, housing, and more importantly, the overall financial markets. So, because the world economy is extremely interconnected, because for decades, globalization has created highly efficient supply chains, which has created cheap manufacturing, just-in-time logistics. We've got our Amazon. If I think if everybody wants to go back 20 years, the whenever you bought something, you usually didn't see it for a week or two. And until Amazon came out with their, Prime, where you could have like next to next day delivery, especially with their creation of their I forget the Amazon facilities where they keep all the stuff, so that way when you order something, it could be within the day. I forget what the name of those facilities are, but you know what I'm talking about. The distribution facility where they keep all they house all the Amazon products so they can get it to you within a day or two. Right. If you were to So now we're used to that, right? We have things that we can get almost like you could actually now get a lot of stuff the same day. That was not the case like 30 years ago. And then also because of the globalization, there's a lot of economic interdependence. The problem is this system works extremely well during stability, but during instability, it becomes extremely fragile. And with the combination of social media and us being able to have like whatever's going on in the world at our fingertips, it definitely seems like the world seems way more volatile nowadays. In some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. So let's start with the energy markets because energy drives everything. If oil prices spike, transportation's cost rise, shipping's costs, food prices, manufacturing costs, they all rise, which inflation will then increase globally. And that's why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much because roughly 20% of the global oil supply moves through this narrow corridor. And even the possibility of disruption can cause markets to react. One good thing that has come out of this is a lot of that oil requirement from all these other nations has actually shifted to the Gulf of America, which has actually helped out a lot of number of Gulf companies within that area, especially Texas and Louisiana. I appreciate you guys. Man, you guys are killing it today. I think about that a lot. China doesn't have warriors because they don't fight wars like us, but will that matter? But will that matter with technology? And that's a great question, right? How much of warfare will be taken out of soldiers, right? I don't think, at least in our generations and in our lives, I don't think we'll ever see the erasure or the full removal of humans outside of warfare. I think that, you know, outside of us going to war with machines, a little Terminator or throw in any other sci-fi um, post or apocalyptic scenario involving machines, that there's always going to be humans because the humans are the ones who are wanting it, right? And there's only so much that they can do without us. Um, and then warfare, especially getting into urban warfare is definitely where um, it's very human centric. So I think that there's going to be a lot more dependence on non-human warfare, but at a certain point, especially when things get really scrappy, it's going to be human on human. All right. Let's see. Um, Nothing specific to add. Be dangerous group. Nothing specific to add. Just really have been enjoying your content lately. Just keep up the great work. I appreciate that, brother. Thank you, man. Um. Oh snap! Flow Wizard coming with a $5. Seems like something's wrong with the Stripe link being stuck in Sandbox from having an old man moment. Love the content and great perspectives. Hey man, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you to everybody, man. I really appreciate this. You guys are definitely we're gonna start going live 3 times a week, and I'm actually looking forward to it because I've actually come to really enjoy doing this stuff, like just talking with people, getting on here. So we are going to, based off of what we're seeing today, we're gonna bring back the streaming software. But we're gonna have to look at some metrics coming out of this. So anyways, so going back to the discussion. So why does energy matter so much? Because energy is not just gasoline. Energy affects trucking, airlines, shipping, manufacturer, agriculture, plastic, fertilizer, um, even and especially military logistics and electrical grids. Because modern civilization runs on energy. So when markets become unstable, everything becomes more expensive. And that affects everybody. And in most countries, you will eventually start seeing it and feeling that in your wallet. So that's one of the reasons, like when these conflicts happens, especially when there are a conflict that's around a like the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, that affects the overall economy, not just with the economies that are involved in that conflict, but the entire world. Then that also adds a level of political pressure to that. So something that's always interesting is that every time that there's a war or conflict, inflation comes along with it because history repeatedly shows that wars are inflationary because wars will disrupt supply chains, increase government spending, they create uncertainty, and they damage infrastructure and reduce overall economic efficiency. So, and one of the biggest things, especially when it comes to markets, is that uncertainty that it creates within the conflicts because you don't know what's going to go. Like we still don't know which way how this Iran conflict is going to go. Is Iran ever going to surrender? Is the RGC ever going to surrender? Right? That creates uncertainty, which then drives markets because markets are based off of perception. And when it's uncertain, that makes those markets volatile because the perception is volatile. Because and especially and that always happens whenever uncertainty rises, that the market becomes even more volatile. And you'll see farther swings of ups and downs than you would outside of those particular situations. Then this also then creates global shipping problems. So the Red Sea disruptions and attacks on shipping lanes have forced many companies to reroute around Africa instead of using the Suez Canal, the Red Sea routes, and the Gulf shipping lanes, which that then increases transit time, fuel costs, insurance costs, which I don't think that a lot of people really think about that, a lot of industries are dependent are required to have insurance or dependent upon insurance. And anytime that these sort of things happen, that they increase one of the costs that increase the cost of doing work is then the increase in the insurance, which then the suppliers, the producers, and even the shipping companies then have to raise their prices, which then always comes out on the back end of the consumers. And then that's when you start to see it as an everyday person, is why these things are getting more expensive. So, where is China's role in this overall global economy? Because the world remains deeply dependent on China for electronics, industrial materials, pharmaceuticals, batteries, rare earth minerals, and even manufacturing and infrastructure. So, what does this mean, right? And specifically, what does this mean when it comes to Taiwan? Because if tensions over Taiwan were ever to escalate significantly, the economic consequences could be really felt enormous globally because of um, that the the production of the microchips that in Taiwan is, I believe that they are the largest producer in the world. And we need that. That's needed for almost everything that we use, and every single sort of computer system, every sort of electronic. And not only are you taking and essentially putting a conflict with one of the most important resources in the world, you're also going to put the two largest economies, if the United States decides to defend Taiwan, in a conflict with each other, would then create a level of economic instability that the world probably has not seen in a very, very long time. Because okay, so sorry, I just remember it's not it's semiconductors. So potential Taiwan disruption will not just affect the semiconductors; they could also affect automobiles, defense systems, AI infrastructure, communications, smartphones, cloud computing, and most importantly, global markets. So, um, well, you're Bernal and CJ. Bernal, we're going to call you. Actually, you have perfect timing because actually I'm going into deglobalization next. So, Bernal says the shift to a decentralized grid means energy is becoming less about utility and more about tech. This is actually true. So one of the biggest trends that's happening right now is the gradual deglobalization. These countries are increasingly prioritizing um, economic security, domestic manufacturing, supply chain resilience, and strategic independence. And the United States is big on this. Donald Trump is really big on this because governments are realizing that efficiency and resilience are not always the same thing. And especially with the last like 20 years, we've seen that all these different conflicts, while globalization was a really good idea to sort of, expand everything, get the best of both worlds with the different economies out there, that because because they're high, this whole system is highly vulnerable and highly volatile. So that's what a lot of these governments are realizing. And a highly optimized global system can become highly vulnerable, as I just said. So, and one of the things that's allowing us to increase sort of the deep globalization is um, is through better and better technology and better energy systems that we're creating. All right. Oh, Tulsi Gabbard resigns. Let's look this up. That is interesting. All right. Yeah, as of 47 minutes ago on CNN, is resigning as the director of national intelligence. Um, I'll read the CNN article real quick. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard announced Friday that she's resigning at the end of June, citing her husband's diagnosis with cancer. Unfortunately, I must submit my resignation effective June 30th. She wrote a letter to President Donald Trump. My husband Abraham has recently been diagnosed with extremely rare form of bone cancer. He faces major challenges in the coming next weeks and months. At this time, I must step away from the public service to be by his side and fully support him through this battle. Trump quickly praised Gabbard and announced Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence Aaron Lucas will serve as Acting Director of Intelligence. Her wonderful husband, Abraham, has been recently diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer, and she's rightly wants to be with him, bringing him back to good health as they currently fight a tough battle together. Trump wrote on Truth Social, adding that Gabbard has done an incredible job and we will miss her. So that's interesting. All right. So that is very unfortunate for her and her husband, and I wish them the best. And I already know, and I think anybody else who thinks about it, people are already going to twist this as being like, oh, okay, well, because of Joe can't resign, now Tulsi Gabbard is resigning, right? And they'll try to spin it like as she's resigning not because of her husband's health, but um because of her disagreements with the Trump administration, because of just everybody, because of the political divisiveness of our country, people are just going to say crazy shit and want to use everything as a to support their particular side. So this why I'm going to go back to the way that I see things, the way that I look at things, right? Is there a possibility that this is all huge cover up to Tulsi just hates Trump and just wants to get out of office or something like that, right? There's always a possibility for any of these crazy conspiracy theories because there are always crazy conspiracy theories until they're true. But until I see any evidence supporting anything, I'm just generally going to take it as face value. And, you know, and if something, but I will always stay open minded. So if anything else comes out that says otherwise, cool. If not, I'm going to take this at face value, considering you look at human psychology and human emotion. If her husband has a rare form of bone cancer, is definitely going to be going through some really intensive procedures probably the next couple of weeks. Yeah, she'd probably want to spend the time with her husband instead of being in the office. So I think anybody can relate to that. Let's see. Um, A702. I'm super late. Have you answered something similar to why do people say China owns the USA? Why, when we owe Japan more money than we owe China? It's the same people that say that Israel owns the United States. All right. So you have to understand that nothing is cut and dry when you're like, oh, we owe money to another country, right? There's a lot of nuance in these systems, and there's a lot of nuance when it comes to macroeconomics, especially between countries. So there are debts that are owed and then owned by certain companies that are maybe owned by other countries, everything like that. Everybody thinks because let's just say that the United States owes China money. This isn't like how it works in the world where is that your debtor, the person who owns your debt can then just come and start taking your stuff. Well, I can tell you right now that's not going to happen because the United States will not let China come and repo things of the United States. So just because a country owes another country something does not mean that they now control them. That's not how that works. Are there other things that they could affect because that country owes you money? That's really where it comes in. Can they push influence? But if the country who holds your debt is not stronger than you are, then there's not much they can do. And China has its own economic problems through a lot of decisions that they've made over the last 20 or 30 years that are coming back. Um, they're rearing to them, if you will, are causing second and third order effects because China sort of probably took a couple of shortcuts as far as their economy to get it going, get it booming, and through their governmental system. there are a lot of issues. The one child policy, a number of different things that they did are now causing issues nowadays. And China's economy is actually struggling a bit. What do you think about Dwight Eisenhower's farewell speech writing about the military-industrial complex? Actually, no, I'm sorry. Let me go back to your first question. So, didn't her office get raided last week? I believe it did. Was it? I believe it was raided by the CIA. You know what? I should probably come up with a better location to put my keyboard in instead of just running my hand over this thing. Was so Okay. So apparently that's a no. It did not. So they said no, the CIA did not raid Tulsi Gabbard's office. While rumors and whistleblower claims circulated online that CIA raided her office to seizure documents such as those related to the JFK an assassination and Project MK Ultra, Gabbard's office, along with the opposite of the DNI, the Director of National Affairs, officially designed these claims. For officially tracking the issue, you can monitor updates. Um, or checked from the office of the director. So they're denying such things. So, but I would be honest, my my confirmation bias, and I'll be honest, when my confirmation bias goes off and it's getting triggered and I want to believe something, um, I believe personally from what I've seen within the CIA and everything like that, they definitely like to overstep their bounds, and they are constantly pushing, and they will push, and they will base. They're the type of organization. You know, you've heard this time old saying, "It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission." That's probably the motto of the CIA. We'll just put it that way, because I personally see them do things that they are not technically supposed to do, and they will do them until somebody tells them, "Hey," to basically slap their wrist and tell them to stop doing it. So the CIA is constantly pushing the envelope. So, not gonna lie, when I first heard this, I was like, "Oh, maybe that did actually happen." Okay. Yeah, and uh, you can honestly look a lot, especially a lot of the history that we know now about what the CIA was doing. It's and with the CIA has only grown in power. Like, for example, like there was a time when all like sort of like cell phones and wiretapping was done through the NSA. No, the CIA has its own organic capability for doing basically what the NSA does. It's called the Directorate of it's the Director of Science and Technology. That's what that holder. It's basically their own NSA. So the CIA has almost every capability that you can think of that every other intelligence service. It's completely redundant. All right, let's go back to where we were at. Any more questions? What do you think about Dwight Eisenhower's farewell speech about the military-industrial complex? Warning about it, right? I would agree because you got to think about it, right? You have to. All this comes back to is understanding human psychology and human emotion, right? Everybody wants to get what's good for them, right? And there are a lot of people who have the character who will sacrifice some of their own things to do things for other people. But a lot of people are not like that, especially people in business. And when people start making money, what do they want to do? They want to make more money. Just like when people get into power, what do they want? They only want more power. And the way that the government spends things, specifically in the United States military industrial complex, because it's almost endless, is you can make a lot of money in in the United States military industrial complex, and um, that is obviously one of the reasons why we were pushed into the Iraq War, and that is a lesson that we need to keep in mind. That they are not should not be the ones who make money off of wars should not be the ones influenced because we're just going to keep going into wars because they make money regardless. While the rest of the world is hurting through these conflicts we talked about with globalization, the military industrial complex wins every single time. So, you know, while obviously I served in the military for 20 years and big fan of the way that the American do things, but there's also cons to everything, including the way that the American military system does things. And one of the biggest side effects is the military industrial complex and the huge negatives that come from that system sometimes. So, all right. So let's see. Which actually, this is a great segue because another thing that's affecting the global economy right now is that defense spending is rising and global defense spending, and not just in the United States, but globally, that defense spending is exploding globally. Countries across Europe, Asia, and Middle East are increasing their military budgets dramatically. And obviously, we had a bit of a hand in this because we made part of NATO at the beginning of Trump's term, this last term, made NATO basically increase their budgets. Um, so, which they needed to do, right? Obviously, NATO needs to learn how to defend themselves, but because we've been doing it for too long. But that's also creating throughout the world and all these other countries who are spending more on defense, that's creating more debt. It's obviously creating more government spending. It's creating more industrial mobilization, and it's putting more pressure on the national economies. And we are likely entering an era where national security increasingly will shape economic policy because it is these countries, when they start spending more money, they are now creating their own military industrial complex, probably within that country, or the military complexes within the greater areas who serve them those who service those countries will now also get more powerful. So the same issues that we deal with here in the United States, other countries are now going to have to start dealing with that same potential issues in with the overall industrial military complex. And this is going to become more of a global problem than it ever was prior. Um, Silver Soldier. It's kind of the American business now, and I have a GED, but I joined the army at 18, did the Afghanistan thing. I know more dudes with master degrees and make more money than them now. Absolutely. Um, you there are different types of educations, right? Like our boy Silver Soldier, and even myself, right? Um, we got an education. Not maybe not your typical education, but it's still an education, right? And the things that you learn in the military, learn in combat are extremely useful, more useful than degrees that you'll get to some of these companies, especially the ones that exist within that military industrial complex. So it's a very lucrative business, mainly because of how much the government pays for things. Like you've probably seen, there's a number of different examples of this, but I think that they had a bunch of aircraft bushels, which you could make from like $100, and I'm pretty sure that the company that made these bushels for these aircraft was charging like it was like $10,000 for a single bag that cost $100, which would have cost $100 to make or buy it individually. It was some ridiculous number. It was like over like 100x times what the price should have been. And when you have people who are in charge and how they buy contracts, and probably you've probably seen like networks. There's a documentary about this, um, and it's about I forget the name of the documentary, but it's essentially it's how the United States end up putting the contract to build the Bradley fighting vehicle, and the ridiculousness of that whole process, and how that thing just turned into uh just got out of control essentially, and the amount of money spending, the what that vehicle ended up turning into is crazy. So so the next part of the global economy is AI, because AI is becoming a major economic force multiplier, right? There are so many positions within specifically software, which is almost kind of like an interesting thing because like 10, 15 years ago, everybody was being told there's one industry that is awesome for the future. And that's where like software development, getting into tech, being IT. And the ironic thing is that these are the people that help build AI, and the first jobs that are getting essentially replaced by AI are the software and IT techs. And that's definitely hurt that specific industry. And I know a couple of people in the industry, and it's really hard to find jobs. So, because if you got one human who can now do the job of five other humans because of AI technology, why would you not? Like, it just makes sense because now you can spend less money on people and spend more money on your company, your product, and how to advance that particular industry. It makes sense, right? Just like, and I know people will get upset, be like, hey, what about the people, right? Okay, I forget what year it was, but it was like the turn of the 20th century, like early 1900s. The largest industry in the United States was horses. Within 4 years of the creation of the automobile, it dropped to be one of the lowest industries within 4 years. The most lucrative, largest industry in the United States was gone in 4 years, right? And what did people do? Everybody who's in so many people resolve their life and their profession revolved around horses. And what did they do? They figured it out. They got new jobs, they got new training. The same thing goes for all these other people, right? They have to adapt. We all have to adapt, right? We can sit here and we can cry about it all day long. Oh my God, AI is taking my job. Well, you know what? Go get educated. Go find something else. Go figure something else out, right? Everybody has had to do this in the history of life. You are not any different. So, if there's any piece of advice that I give, especially within this live, is if you're in an industry that's dying, uh, basically start preparing to get into a new industry, right? And there's plenty of things that you can do out there. Follow your passion, follow your love, or just do something that you can make money. That industries that are not going to go away anytime soon. So think about that. So, but continuing, so AI can radically reshape labor markets, productivity, finances, logistics, and warfare. And by an additional warfare is the information community and also the information systems that then power all those different types of subsets, whether it's warfare, finance, logistics. The challenge is the technological acceleration is happening faster than government institutions can adapt and put laws in place. And this is not an uncommon thing. This happened with the dawn of the internet, everything like that. Governments are always slow to help regulate these things because whenever there's a new industry like AI, it's like the wild wild west out there, right? And we use that term because the wild wild west was because there weren't really any governments out there regulating what is going on, and that is every time there's a dawn of a new industry, which was the internet or AI, this happens, right? Like, even draw some parallels to other things. Like right now, there's the whole TRT and peptides market, right? It's the wild, wild west out there right now. So, right, be careful. Make sure you're getting the right, going to the right companies, getting real doctors' prescriptions from real doctors, right? That's neither here nor there. So, yeah, that's something you always have to think about. All right. So, one of the biggest misconceptions. I don't know what I'm saying. Let me answer some more questions real quick. Let's see. They teach you how to be successful if you pay attention, but the army also prepares you for sleeping outside if you aren't successful. Well, they also that one good advantage is things life in the military sucks, and one of the things that help you learn pretty quickly in the army, which I think is a good thing if you frame it properly, is they put you through a lot of really stupid things and a lot of uncomfortable things, and you really learn how to deal with shitty things. And shitty things happen in life, and that's definitely one of the things that being in the military prepared me for is crap situations because the military puts you in crap situations. So I definitely built my resilience on the stupidity of the military. Um, A702, can you help me understand why college educational credits are necessary for promotion in the military? Why did battlefield promotions go away? I'm gonna be honest. Battlefield promotions, I I believe, are still within the capability of the military, but they are only really instituted in wartime, right? Because battlefield promotions are required in warfare because all the time, uh, in combat, especially like when people are dying at a rapid rate, the officers need to be put into positions, and not just officers, but non-commissioned officers, soldiers, but specifically off commissioned officers, that they have to be put into those positions almost immediately. And a lot of times they need to be placed. Um, Sometimes they need the appropriate rank to order to achieve that position, or you at least get them closer in rank. So that's one of the reasons like battlefield promotions were very quick. If you look at the promotion rates of what things were like in World War II, obviously much quicker than they are outside of wars, especially world wars. So that's where the battlefield promotions. Getting college credit is the military promotion system is always constantly evolving, and they are constantly trying to push us to want to better ourselves. And so they'll start throwing things that are like, oh, this guy is going out there, he's doing all this different extra, and it's becoming more competitive. And because they see such a level of importance on military or education, that's why they're like, okay, you need credits um to be competitive. So that's what probably the main reason is, just because the military wants you to be more competitive. They want you to further improve yourself, right? And getting more education is not wrong, right? If I'm a soldier, why do I need college if I'm a war fighter? Maybe I can understand going to a war college, but not everything goes to that. So I would disagree with you on this. Uh, my boy A702. So you need to be the best soldier, right? If you only train in the discipline and education of war, you are actually not going to be in a very effective war fighter. The most effective war fighters, right? You look at the most effective generals in the history of war, almost all of them were extremely well educated outside of the disciplines of war, especially philosophy and history, right? Um, because those, you know, and you could really think of almost like every great modern general, even every general or commander in probably in the last like 1,000, 2,000 years, they were extremely well educated. And you always want to be the most broad person as far as your education, because life, there's so many disciplines, there's so many things that go on in life, and to be as broadly educated as you can has only but advantages, right? Obviously, you should specific be, have something that you want to be really good at, and you should be good at that. But you should also be good at other things as well, because it also gives you a better understanding of the world in its entirety, and it just a greater understanding of the generalizations that happen throughout the world. And then you can also understand other people, because in war, even in warfare, you're going to be dealing with people who are not soldiers, who are not warriors, right? And if you don't have any sort of education in any of these other instruments, you're not going to understand it. So you definitely think you should have a much broader education outside of the military as somebody in the military. So that's my personal belief. It's definitely helped me in my life, and I would recommend it to anybody else. I got battlefield promoted to specialist in Afghanistan 2011. See, there you go. All right. So next is um, so let's move into what maybe become one of the most important and dangerous battlefields of the future, which is artificial intelligence and information warfare. Because modern conflict is no longer just about tanks, missiles, aircrafts, and troops. It's also about controlling narratives, shaping perception, influence populations, and manipulating information at scale, right? Because if you can control the flow of information, in a lot of ways, you'll actually control the war. And this has always been something that everybody's tried to do since, especially in the course of modern warfare, it's become more important. But AI is only accelerating this. But because the information environment has changed, because for most of human history, information moved relatively slowly. Then came the radio, then television, then the internet, and now social media. But now we are entering another phase, and that is the AI information generated ecosystem. And this changes everything. So, what can AI systems do now? They can generate realistic images. We can clone voices. Like you've listened to so many probably TikToks, whatever memes, and you hear actors' voices speaking along to different things. And there's definitely fake videos of them doing things that that's not actually not them. You can create synthetic video, which will allow them to actually automate it. You can almost automate propaganda at this point. You can generate entire fake articles. You can manipulate narratives, and you can psychologically target specific audiences. And because of this AI technology, you can do it at a much higher rate. And I think one of the first things that the Iran conflict started, there was Iran has been their state media has been releasing some deep fakes, and some of them were really bad. But there was that specific one that it was like right after the start. It was a AI generated picture of a bunch of Delta Force guys in uniform, and they had been captured by the Iranians, and they were being marched through um like whatever the streets of Tehran, and they had a 4-star general who was who's at the head. And obviously everybody else who saw this was deep fake. But I forget what it was, it was one of the congresswomen who was like, "Oh my god, if this is true, this changes everything." And everybody was like, "Okay, come on, man. Like, how did you not know this was not real?" Right? But a lot of people who are not that well educated, especially the older generation who was not really used to the internet and the new technology that AI can do and all the fakes it can do, especially the deep fakes, because that's really one of the biggest concerns, the deep fakes, because AI can now generate fake speeches, fake interviews, fake combat footage, fake political statement, and fake military announcements. So we now have to develop a skill of whenever we see images now, we have to ask our questions. Is this even real? Is it fake? So it's definitely technology is improving really rapidly, and distinguishing reality from fabrication may become extremely difficult for average people, especially low intelligence people. So the dangerous part is not just fake information. The dangerous part is people losing trust in all information, because people once people believe that everything could be fake, every video could be manipulated, and every source could be propaganda, that the objective truth itself starts eroding, right? And that we can already draw some parallels with this, like right, like before conspiracy theories ever started being proven true, we that's all everybody thought. They were just like, oh, conspiracy theories, the government wouldn't lie to us, right? But now that we've seen instances where the government has lied to us and there are conspiracy theories, they are true. Now everything is now considered a conspiracy theory, right? And so that those are sort of like the pros and cons. So this is sort of a parallel to that. Is like now that we've seen that things can actually create deep fakes, now people are be like, oh, is everything a deep fake, and not trust anything they hear. Which, look, as everybody knows, I'm a firm believer of a healthy level of skepticism. So this creates a couple different things. This creates confusion, polarization, distrust, and social instability, because AI driven propaganda is historically propaganda that was required of government, intelligence services, intelligence agencies, um, probably the really large media infrastructures, like CNN, ABC, the ones that had massive resources. But now, because of AI, because so propaganda used to be kind of like the tool of like basically the big guys, governments, intelligence services, and big media companies. But now, because of AI, small groups, even individuals, can now create like fake news, and it's been generated. It has the potential to generate some very sophisticated influence campaigns with very little resources and effort. So this dramatically lowers the barrier to these type of psychological operations. So that's something that we need to take into account, because that's something we're going to see more of. And now, because we're going to see more of it, we have to develop a better skill to be better at spotting this, right? Like, know when things are fake. It's going to be a very common thing. Like, the first thing that you do is when you see something, you now have apps and technology which to actually look at things and determine whether or not it's AI, right? But then eventually they're going to create AI programs who are going to get better at hiding those characteristics that these programs then use to detect. And then those programs will then have to get better at detecting them. And this whole cat and mouse thing that we see through um, with hackers and um, your computer defense programs that have to that try to keep out hackers and all the new technologies. It's a very similar thing that's going on, and that we will have to develop that skill. It's a new skill that we are going to have to develop as people going forward. So this also creates a couple other issues. And another issue is the social media algorithms already prioritize outrage, emotional engagement, fear, tribalism, and most importantly, conflict. So, but AI will then amplify this because emotionally charged content spreads faster than calm, nuanced analysis. And we've talked about this numerous times on this channel, is that that's the problem. Is almost every single time something comes out, we're going to hear the craziest political takes, the craziest levels of political posture, because the calm, actual analysis doesn't get pushed, because that's not clickbaity. The truth is not clickbait. Analysis, that's not clickbaity. That's not sexy, right? Unfortunately, it is not, right? So the things that are going to get pushed in the algorithms, because it makes sense, right? They want the people to view their stuff. By viewing their stuff, they view their ads, they make money, right? So they're going to spread the emotionally charged content that probably has a good chance of not being true. And creates an environment where extreme narratives, conspiracies, manipulated content, and emotional reactions outperform the truth. So that's something we need to keep definitely in mind. So AI and then geopolitical competition. Actually, we'll answer some questions before going to the next section. Let's see. I think learning other languages is the best education. You're not wrong. So if anybody ever comes and asks me any advice, if you ever want to get into the intelligence services, and what's the best way to get in the intelligence services to do it operationally, probably the best thing that you can do is learn languages. If you have an aptitude for languages, you will go to the head of the line of, like, if you want to be a CIA case officer or any sort of these intelligence services, that's probably the number one skill they're looking for. Um, so learning languages, it just helps you throughout the world. Just I can't begin to tell you what level of rapport you can build by just even attempting to speak the language of the country in, outside of Paris. That's like the one place where you try to speak their language and they're actually gonna hate on you more. So that's my caveat. Outside of Paris, if you try to speak their language, they're gonna actually be really excited about it, especially cultures like Italy, Brazil. They actually love when you try to speak their language. Um, Using AI celebrity to scam old people is sad. Yeah, but you also remember that they didn't grow up around the internet. So, like, the internet, even before AI scams, was already kind of hard for them to understand. And now they're seeing images that look, honestly, especially for the old boomers, looks pretty real, right? This is crazy technology. So what they've never experienced anything like that. So why would they not immediately believe it, right? We are now experienced, so we've grown up in this. And if we constantly keep adapting, we're going to have to adapt the fact that, with every new technology comes with some certain drawbacks and some certain dangers, if you will. I downloaded Twitter, but deleted after a week from constant AI fake news. Yeah, well, it's definitely one of the things that you get is there's a lot of fake news. It's interesting because for somebody like myself who obviously my main focus is YouTube, but I also post their clips and shorts on Instagram, TikTok, and X. It's very interesting to see the different types of communities that are in each one of these different platforms because most people sort of like you're either a big YouTube guy, you're a big Instagram guy, or you're a big guy on X. And obviously, most people have different accounts, but most people center on one. And there's sort of a gradual trend of the type of people that I have found on each one of these. And I find it interesting. The people who center on TikTok are the worst. I'll just put that out there. Is human on the rise again? Humans will always be um, will always be one of the most influential tools. The only problem with human is by itself, it takes a long time and it's hard to verify human intelligence, right? And that's the beauty of using human intelligence alongside other types of intelligence disciplines like SIGINT, OSINT, which is signals intelligence, open sources intelligence, and everything else. You combine those, but the greatest thing about human is like the best sources are the ones that you turn, right? And nobody does that better than human. And if you can get somebody to emotionally believe in your cause and then, come to you and help you, like that's some of the greatest um wins in the history of the intelligence services and the military have come from people that we've able to either turn into some sort of resistance or inside agents. So as long as we have human is never going to go away, right? But the question is, how do you make human as effective as possible by using the other intelligence disciplines? And so human by itself is a very slow and hard to verify process, but combined with the other intelligence disciplines, it's a very effective and probably one of the most effective ones. Um, it's for especially for long-term access. So appreciate you, Flo. Appreciate the $2, brother. So psyops everywhere. The last data was I went on told me I was racist for believing we need a closed border. All right. So there are a lot of closed-minded people out there, Silver Soldier. And you have to just come to terms that there are a lot of closed-minded people. And that's not going to change. So, and I wouldn't get upset about it. Honestly, what that person's giving they're giving you a gift. They're telling you, hey, I'm closed-minded and we're definitely going to have issues down the road. And the fact that they're kind of showing you their true colors, that's good. Never be in a, if I have to give any sort of relationship advice to anybody about who not to be with, definitely one of the biggest red flags is closed-minded people. All right. If you can, it's okay for you to, like, for example, let's just say you're conservative and you go on a date or you're dating somebody who's liberal. As long as they can have a discussion with you and, consider your points and you consider their points, you'll be just fine. But the second that somebody immediately uses, like, oh, you were racist because you want closed borders, that person is so close-minded. There's other red flags stored, tucked away that you do not even want to deal with. So just trust me. Like you dodged a bullet there, my friend. French people are just jealous of Americans at all. Well, let's just be honest. Like, let's not try to be biased here. All right, about the French, but old Frenchies um, aren't really known for much other than losing wars, surrendering, and specifically Parisians, right? Parisians are the people that live in Paris. If you actually outside of Paris, most people in France are actually generally nice. It's the Parisians who have their noses stuck up their asses. So they're the people who are who think that they're better than everybody else in the world, which nobody actually thinks that. Let's see. All right. All right. We got about 15 more minutes. How effective would you say the village stability operations were in gathering intel in Afghanistan? Flow. I would know. I was born there, dealt with Persians all my time. My brother lives there and despises it. Yeah. Well, there you go. Man on the ground, man who knows the truth, knows it better than I do. I lived in Germany and we took a couple trips to France, and I don't really all remember that much. So I haven't really spent that much time in France, but I actually am supposed to go to Paris at the end of the summer uh, for for a for somebody's birthday. So um, maybe I'll see your brother there, Flo. All right, let's get through this. How would you say the village stability operations were in gathering intel in Afghanistan? Well, there were definitely a lot of successes, right? We were able to gather a lot of intel, but the problem that we always run into is you can gather intel, right? And it's never going to be with every culture there are pitfalls, right? When the Afghanistan Iraqi culture, a lot of it comes down to tribes and their local communities because they favor their loyalties lie to their local communities like tribes over they do any sort of nationalist identity. So that when it's like that, whatever information they give you is very localized and it can only go so far. You still need that intelligence for those specific operations in that region, but um, there's always a case of whether how effective things are, and that's usually things that are the most effective are things that have a much larger reach or have um, much long lasting access. And a lot of village operations, any sort of intelligence that you get or any sort of access is only there for so long before that person either gets killed or that person dies or that region is no longer a place that you're even operating in. So there's a lot of it's not necessarily I think the question is how effective or were they effective at all? I think that, they obviously we were able to get intelligence out of those village operations, but how much impact did they actually have? And that's one of the issues of dealing with that type of culture and that type of intelligence. So, all right. So the next part is talking about AI and political or geopolitical, or no, I'm sorry, yeah, AI and geopolitical competition, because the major powers in the world are already investing heavily in AI assisted intelligence analysis, narrative shaping, cyber warfare, influence operations, and automated information campaigns, right? Because if it's a tool and you can use it to win war through propaganda and disinformation, why would you not use it? Every nation who's ever been at war has used these skills, right? It's not people might think they're dishonorable. It's not. If you're going to win a war, you're going to win a war. But this was theoretical as far as AI doing this sort of aspects, but it's not theoretical anymore. AI has already been integrated into military planning, intelligence operations, um, battlefield targeting, surveillance, and propaganda systems and cyber capabilities. So, information warfare during conflicts. So, one thing that we've been seeing repeatedly during the Ukraine, the Iran conflict, Israel, Gaza, and the other global crises is that information warfare now simultaneously happens with physical warfare because you now have drone footage with AI generated narratives, you have meme warfare, online influence campaigns, you have bot amplifications and propaganda battles. all happening in real-time conflicts. Because you got to think about this, like just 10 years ago, like, there were bot accounts, right? But there was people that would be on accounts and that they would have all these different phones and they would like connect them, and where you can get people to make multiple comments and multiple things, and drive sort of an algorithm by doing specific actions. But now that's now expanded to where individual accounts can now make these entire propaganda campaigns that usually were required by a much bigger resource intensive system, and then they would use the bots to then help push that through the algorithm. But now you can now those each one of those phones, it can now create its own propaganda campaign, and that can be a little scary if you think about it. And but one of the things that's we have to take into account is the speed of modern narratives, because the narratives now move globally just within minutes. A video clip, whether it's true or false, can influence markets, can shape public opinion. It can create panic, it can trigger protests, and it can even escalate tensions just before governments or medias can even verify it. And that can be definitely dangerous. So, but AI is also rapidly changing cyber warfare. Its AI systems may increasingly assist with automated hacking, vulnerability discovery, phishing campaigns, infrastructure truck targeting, and cyber defense. So, which means future conflicts could be faster, more automated, and even more difficult to contain. But one of the bigger strategic concerns is that the world's technological acceleration is happening faster than laws, governments, institutions, educations, and society can adapt. Because historically, periods where technology follows faster than institutions often creates these periods of instability, which we talked about before. Like it takes time. It's like the wild, wild west out there, especially when it comes to AI. So, and which is then creating a whole nother level of psychological warfare, because the goal is not just to destroy military capability. You want to exhaust the populations. You want to create division within those populations. You want to increase fear, you want to decrease morale. And if you are able to destabilize the society and weaken public trust, the speed at which you may win that conflict or win that war increases exponentially. And this is why information warfare matters so much, especially nowadays, because information has become more important with the speed and the access that it now has the capability to go throughout the world within seconds. Because this next generation warfare is not just physical, it's cognitive. The battlefield is increasingly the human mind itself. So, all right. We got about 5 minutes. Hey, Flo. Yep. Yeah. I hope it goes well. The Parisians, they do food pretty well. All right. I want to talk about my favorite subject, space, baby. It's all about space. If anybody knows me truly, the one thing that I would truly want to do in this world is I want to be an astronaut. All right. So after maybe the social media thing goes off, maybe that'll be a part of my next series, is getting into the astronaut program. Obviously, I need to go get myself some more education and get some master's degrees and maybe a doctor one of these days. But eventually, I want to go to space. So, and honestly, SpaceX and the Starship version 3 launch today that hopefully goes off between 6:30 and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight, honestly will probably shape the future more than people realize. So anybody who's not tracking, Starship is the largest and most powerful rocket ever built. The full system is nearly 400 feet tall, around 120 meters, and roughly a 40-story building. So imagine a 40-story building going into space on a lot of really big rockets. It produces approximately 16 to 17 million pounds of thrust, and it's more than twice the power of the Saturn V moon rocket, which is what launched the astronauts to space in during the Apollo missions. So, but why? What's important about the Starship, right? It's it's long-term roles. All right. So by the Starship will have the capability when it's going through all of its testing and it continues on. It's after version 3, the finished testing version 3, they're going to go to version 4, and eventually this the Starship is going to allow us to move hundreds of people at a time, hundreds of tons of equipment. Like right now, like we are limited to the size of our rockets and what we can put out. And then if you ever, let's say, want to build a space station, we have to piecemeal it out, and that takes so many launches because the rockets are only so big, and then the payloads that those rockets can carry are only so large. Starship is going to allow us to put have so much room to put so much larger equipment and pieces and just payloads, and on top of hundreds of people that eventually um, will eventually be put into space. And then the system is actually what's planned to be the rocket to do the Apollo the next missions to land on the moon, the next series of missions. I'm trying to think what the name for it was because so, for example, this launch that's happening later today, it's carrying 22 satellites. Well, they're mock. They're not real satellites, but they're mocks just to indicate the size and the weight. But there are 22 mock Starlink satellites. Can you imagine that? That's how big this thing is. It's carrying 22 satellites. So if SpaceX achieves this, it will completely change the economics of space, which SpaceX has already changed the economics of space. Like it at the very beginning, SpaceX already put it to like cut the cost of rockets going to space by 1/10, and it's only ever continued to cut those costs as SpaceX has continued to advance. Because and a lot of people um, people are like see like failures. One, that's how you build rockets, right? Like you can't go into space and not blow up rockets. Because most people are watching Starship and they're seeing these explosions, but SpaceX is trying to build um, the infrastructure for the next 100 years. And so, but at the end, like, you guys understand the world is changing rapidly, and if we want to stay informed, stay on top of it, and basically not get duped by these deep fakes, the deep fakes of AI, the deep fakes of governments, and deep fakes of potential girlfriends or boyfriends, whichever way you swing. We have to be aware, be a healthy skeptic, and constantly educate yourself as much as you can. Economic warfare, AI drones, cyber operations, energy control, informational warfare, space infrastructure are just as important as your traditional military strength. And the dangerous part is that most people still do not realize how fast these changes are actually happening, because the future is arriving much faster than governments can. Um, the future is arriving much faster than governments, institutions, and societies are prepared for. And so be careful out there. It's the wild, wild west in some of these industries. And until the government can get a handle on it, a lot of it's not going to be regulated. So you could get duped in the process. There's a lot of potential to make money, do all sorts of things, but there's a lot of scammers out there. Some of them might even be from Somalia. All right. Well, anyways, I appreciate everybody. Thank you for hanging out with me for the last 2-ish hours. I appreciate you guys. All right. So if you guys have not, we're going to be doing these every single week, 3 times a week. Next week, we'll have the streaming software up, and we'll actually be able to follow along. We'll watch some more videos, making it entertaining. But I appreciate everybody who's here. Thank you. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, hit the notification bell. Because sometimes, because I talk about some nuanced subjects, whether it's unaliving yourself and different things like that, sometimes YouTube doesn't recommend my videos, even if you're subscribed. So hit the notification bell, and that way you are able to support what I'm trying to do. And any sort of support you guys can give is amazing. And thank you, everybody, for pain with me. I'll talk to you guys later.